thanks again, and thanks to you and to Kin for inviting us to participate today. I'll get right into it because I know we have a short bit of time here. Obviously, disclaimer: there's some forward-looking statements in here, but really, to start out, just for those that don't know IsoEnergy well or at all, we were formed back in 2016. At that time, it was NexGen Energy. Some or all of you might know at NexGen Energy, a big project in Athabasca, one of the biggest in the world. They spun out 5 Eastern Athabasca properties, formed IsoEnergy, and started what we have today. So for those that follow uranium pretty closely, like you do, Gwen, I mean, it was a really difficult period of the market at that time. I put a little chart on there with a star showing where in the cycle we were when ISO was formed, and really, toughest time of the cycle over the last 10, 12 years, but really an opportunity. If you had the wherewithal to start a company, what it did was, we started with 5 properties. Through the next few years in a tough market, we were able to leverage the people and the access to capital, and we now have more than 20 projects, of which Larocque East is our flagship, and that's home to the Hurricane deposit, which is now host to the world's highest grade uranium resource. So that's us in a nutshell. I'll just maybe jump into one slide on nuclear, and it's not lost on me that we're invited to a green conference, and it wasn't very long ago, even a couple of years ago or even less, that really nuclear and uranium companies wouldn't be invited to some of these conferences, and it just goes to show that the narrative, the global narrative around uranium and nuclear is really changing. And so, just to highlight a few things, sort of the world that IsoEnergy lives in. I mean, uranium and nuclear has just been recognized as being critical in the fight against climate change. There's been lots of reversals of folks wanting to shut down, good existing nuclear power plants, whether it's in California, Michigan, Germany started to reverse some of its decisions, which is it's about time and really a positive for the industry. Even the EU Parliament's recently backed the green nuclear label as part of the EU taxonomy, which puts it in a good spot to enhance its ability to fund and grow the nuclear footprint in Europe. And just uranium is becoming part of the critical mineral strategies that a lot of governments and jurisdictions are unveiling. One, right here in Saskatchewan, the government made a big announcement on that yesterday, and obviously everybody's looking to battery metals and what needs to be done to advance the energy transition. But part of that is, how do we then energize all of this electricity, these electricity driven, vehicles, everything that we're transitioning to, and certainly nuclear is getting more and more of a place at the table. So a lot of that also, is a result of some geopolitical shifts happening with everything going on in Russia. That's changed thoughts around energy security, but also just on uranium and nuclear fuel, which has traditionally come in a big way out of Russia, and a lot of that's changing, and it's changing the landscape for uranium supply going forward. There's also a lot of strengthening commitments to nuclear, both by countries that haven't had nuclear in the past, which is like countries like Poland, which are committing to building new plants for the first time, but also a lot of countries that we're starting to kind of see a bit of a wane in their nuclear commitment in Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands, and certainly even France, which is 75% of their electricity comes from nuclear. They were starting to look at slowing that down a bit, maybe going to 50%. That's completely changed course. Similar in South Korea and even Japan, really making big changes there. So China continues to be a huge story. I think at least 7 units are slated for first construction this year alone. So they will soon be the biggest generator of nuclear electricity on the planet in the years to come. So the United States, their nuclear under the Inflation Reduction Act, enjoys bipartisan support, which is people, would recognize there's not many topics that enjoy bipartisan support in the US. So it's really important to see that. And all that comes around to, the fact that the fundamentals, supply demand fundamentals have never been stronger. still 433 plants operating, 61 under construction. And, you know, something that the industry looks to as a big indicator of how things are going is uncovered requirements. So how much demand is out there, but how much has actually been contracted for and how much is still open to be contracted for. And there's more than 2.3 billion pounds that utilities need to contract only through the next 17 years, which in, you know, the nuclear timeframe is very short, and more than 500 million pounds over the next 7 years. So lots of good things happening in nuclear, you know, Cameco restarting, all these, you know, great stories, but a lot of new production is going to be needed. And that's where the NexGens, the Denisons, but also the IsoEnergies come in. And that's sort of the world we live in. And very, very quick overview, Gwen, kind of rushing through it, but just to sort of set the stage for where it is that IsoEnergy finds itself. So, you know, as I mentioned at the outset, our flagship asset is the Hurricane deposit at Larocque East. And this wasn't one of the original properties. We picked this up in 2018. That was May of that year. By July, we'd sunk one drill hole at the end of a summer program, found mineralization, and really focused the next 6 drill programs over the next few years on delineating out what has become the Hurricane deposit. So just some incredible high grades of uranium, you know, on par with anything in the basin, upwards of 70+% on some of these drill holes that we had at Hurricane. From that, last year, July of last year, we put together our initial mineral resource, and that, you know, came out at just under 50 million pounds at an average grade of 34.5%. So that, as on an average grade basis on a single, you know, resource, that is the highest average uranium resource, you know, on the planet. And it's a very small, very consolidated deposit. 44 million pounds of that is at over 52% uranium. So just really an incredible deposit. You see the plan view there with the dark orange representing the highest grade part of the deposit. This is just another view of that, the plan view with a little cutout cross section there, and just sort of turn it on its side and look at the schematic on the right hand side, and it just demonstrates sort of what type of deposit it is. It's, you know, sitting in the unconsolidated sandstone, so that thin, very high grade layer of uranium is layered right on top of the graphitic basement rock. Like I said, sitting mostly in the unconsolidated sandstone, and just a very small consolidated piece of uranium. So a deposit like this, really, when we look at it, it's got a number of key strategic advantages. Number one, of course, is the grade, just that 48.6 million pounds at 34.5%. It's also quite shallow. It's relatively shallow compared to other deposits in the region at about 325 meters. There's a drawing at the bottom that sort of shows you where, in proximity to some of the other well-known deposits, Cigar Lake, McArthur River, Phoenix being deposit being developed by Denison, where it sits there, it's somewhat shallower than all those. So not an impediment as far as depth. Infrastructure, the nice thing about being on the eastern side of the basin is that it's where all these deposits and mines have developed over the years. So there's lots of roads, there's lots of power in this eastern side. And for us, we're only 40 kilometers from Orano's McLean Lake Mill. So also very strategic, because that mill, you know, will need feed in the future. So, you know, very hopeful that there's, you know, down the road, there's a good synergy there between these two assets. There's also no water cover at surface. For anyone that's spent any time in northern Saskatchewan, it's half water. So to the extent you don't have water at surface, it just makes it that much easier. And then being in Saskatchewan itself has always been an advantage. Utilities around the world look to Saskatchewan as a very stable jurisdiction. But today, given everything happening in Russia and even Kazakhstan, just geopolitically, Saskatchewan has never looked better as a place to host a deposit such as Hurricane. There's also a lot of innovation going on in the basin, which is beneficial to us, whether it's, you know, Denison developing in situ recovery for the first time. Orano has looked at innovative ways of extracting uranium without developing underground operations. They have a technology called SABRE. There's just a lot of work being done to see how you can access deposits which are smaller. 50 million pounds is smaller than some of these, the bigger monsters, the MacArthur cigars that have been developed in the past. But how do you do that more economically, given that they are such incredible deposits at such incredible grades? So lots of interesting things going on in that front. The other thing I'll just mention is you'll see on the plan view, you can see my mouse. There is a border right here, and that is just the border of the property. On the other side is a Cameco Rano property called Dawn Lake. You can see that the highest intense orange part is right on the border. So we know there's something on the other side. We don't know how much, if it's big or small, but there is work being done on the other side of the border to kind of delineate that and see what that looks like. So that's also another interesting story to keep an eye on in the months and years to come. The other piece I'll just add as far as next steps, we are now starting to look at, okay, what are the next steps with Hurricane? We're doing some work on some high level concept studies, evaluating mining methods, the economics of it, et cetera. So we'll do that internally and then make decisions on how to proceed from that point. That's really, the main Hurricane story. I'll maybe just spend a few minutes on exploration because, as I mentioned, we do have, more than 20 properties. And as you can imagine, when we focused on Hurricane for a few years, some of these other properties kind of got left behind, and we have some very, very high quality projects that we're now able to turn our attention to. So we've been doing a lot of exploration, almost 19,000 meters last year, as well as geophysical survey work on a bunch of properties to line up targets and advance them into the cycle, into the exploration cycle. For this year, we're just finishing up our winter 2023 program. We were doing about 6,800 meters of drilling on our Larocque project and our Hawk project, and also some ground geophysics on Larocque and our Geiger project. And I can just touch on each one specifically just really quickly. With respect to Larocque East, we've been focusing this program up to the northeast side. So you see a area called the Kernahan Trend there. So we put 6 holes down in that area. It's quite shallow, so 2,000 meters, and doing a little bit. We did a couple lines of ground EM, and so just evaluating the results there and the results of that EM to see where we head next with that part of the project. Hawk is a piece of land, a property that we hadn't done much work on previously. We really like it. We did some geophysics that showed some really some good conductors, and so we've done our inaugural program on that. Had some good results, starting to see structures and alterations that we were hoping to see, and so we're also just finishing up with some additional geophysical work on there right now, and hopefully setting ourselves up for some additional drilling next winter. On Geiger, we've done a fair bit of work drilling and geophysics on Geiger. We did some more geophysical work this winter, liking the results we're seeing, and so we'll be hopefully teeing up to do some additional drilling at Geiger this summer. That's a very quick overview of some of the exploration work we're doing. Certainly a lot of other projects in sort of the portfolio to look at. Corporate overview quickly. About 110 million shares outstanding. We're in good shape cash-wise, just about $17 million in the bank. We went out at the end of last year and raised money for the first time in a couple of years, taking just enough to make sure that we get through the next couple of drill programs and set ourselves up very well for 2023 and beyond. We have good coverage by a number of folks that you see listed there. So really good place on the corporate side. Good team in place, and we've been adding and I think strengthening the team a lot over the last year. We added a new CFO last year, Graham DePria, lots of experience in the mining sector. Convinced him to move from Toronto here to Saskatoon. Very happy to have him. And we just hired a new VP of Exploration, Daryl Clark, who comes with enormous experience Used to be a VP of exploration at Cameco for a number of years, then went over to look after their Kazakh project, the JV Inkai project in Kazakhstan. PhD in geology from Australia, and just like I said, just an incredible amount of experience in the sector. It's really to kind of coordinate and partner up with Dave Thomas, who we've had on our team for a couple of years now, who's a technical advisor and just an enormous experience in uranium and the Athabasca Basin over the last 40 years. So a great team in place. I think we're probably running out of time, Gwen, but that's really about it. I mean, the resource, I guess, the highlight here, almost 50 million pounds at 34.5%, incredible grades. Location, couldn't be happier to be in Saskatchewan. Really do believe this is the best location, jurisdiction to have a uranium project or mine or development. The strategy, we're going to continue to pragmatically advance Hurricane, watching what's going on the other side of the border, of course, at the same time, and progress this portfolio of projects we have on the exploration side. Continue to build and strengthen the team. I think we've got a great team in place, and we continue to have great support from NexGen, who remains a 50% shareholder in the company. So we draw on them not just from financially, but corporately and strategically. So yeah, just a lot of really good things going on at IsoEnergy, and really excited and positive about the future to come here. That's where I'll leave it, Gwen, in case you have any questions.
I always have questions, Tim.
Okay. Good.
Never doubt my ability to ask questions.
I don't, trust me.
Thanks for that. That was a great overview. Okay, let's jump right in. I mean, you did a major financing, as you were just describing, excuse me, at the end of last year.
Yep.
And that was, your first major financing since that big resource, made resource on Hurricane. You're the kind of company that now can court another level of investor, right? The institutional investors, those who require more meat on the bone, so to speak, or defined meat on the bone. Yeah. So can you talk to me about the investor interest in IsoEnergy, and therefore your sense of investor interest in uranium from investors of all scales and origins and types? Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a pretty broad question and a good one. I mean, we obviously see tons of interest in the company and the sector. I mean, when we raised $18 million in December, we certainly could have done more. There was lots of interest. I mean, we're happy that we're attracting all the top investors that like uranium, that have been around for a long time. The Sachem Coves, the Sprotts, others that know uranium and are involved with good companies, and so we get good support from those folks. But we are finding, there's more and more interest, obviously, from outside. I mean, it's funny. I mean, we had a 10-12-year down cycle in uranium and nuclear, and every signpost in uranium and nuclear looks great. And so when I wake up in the morning, I think of what's bothering me. It's not anything on the nuclear side of things. And for years that wasn't the case. There was always something that was going wrong, right? There was some issue. Supply and demand, strong, interest, like climate change, and just Joe on the street recognizing the value of nuclear. That's all just growing, so that's great. Obviously, we've gotten kind of locked in with the sort of the downturn with the rest of the market. Everything else kind of pushing things downward, and so nuclear and uranium companies haven't been haven't gotten away from that. So we've taken a little bit. We've seen a little bit of a downturn in our stock and other stocks. But I would say that those that understand nuclear and uranium, and those that are starting to understand climate change and the energy transition are turning more and more to uranium and nuclear companies, and we're seeing that. We're seeing people, whether it's institutional folks or just family offices, others that are looking to learn the story. They want to learn the story, and they want to then invest in good companies with good assets. And luckily, and we're very fortunate today, so that we've got Hurricane. We see ourselves in a unique position. There's a lot of either the small junior, which we were at one point, looking for that first deposit, or you've gone to the NexGens and the Denisons and others developing, and you're into that next phase. or you're a producer or a past producer. There's not many folks with, sort of the quality of deposit at our stage in the cycle as IsoEnergy. So we find we're attracting a lot of interest because of that piece. Like we're still at an early stage, yet we've got this great deposit, and I think it's attracting a certain type of investor and folks that are really excited about the uranium story.
That's cool. Okay, those are heartening answers to hear. One more sort of uranium focused question, and then I've got some more that are specific to ISO. But on the uranium focus side, one of the big things that we always one of the big questions that always hangs in the uranium space about that pertains to when the supply demand gap will really smack people in the face is the contracting question. And we get signals about what's going on in contracting, from Cameco's quarterly calls and things like that. You, as someone in the uranium space, do you have anything interesting or new to add to that conversation that you've heard?
No, you were interesting. I've listened to all the talks, and I certainly stay very close to it. It was a big part of my world for a long time, selling uranium to utilities. That's what I did for a lot of years. I would say a couple of things. I mean, the interesting thing is, our stock and uranium stocks and others, they always turn on the uranium spot price, right? And so when we saw it kind of move last year, it was interesting. It got up to 60. Everybody kind of followed that along, and then it's kind of come down and really stabilized at this $50 spot. But the interesting thing is, irrelevance is the wrong word, but it's almost got to the point where the spot price isn't as relevant as it was at one point, and not that it won't become relevant again. What's relevant right now, I think, is that there is an enormous amount of activity on the long-term contracting going on behind the scenes, and if it's not happening, there's certainly it's got the potential to happen very soon. I mean, we've talked to companies that are, maybe bringing mines back on, and if they go to utilities, there's a lot of interest in those utilities to sign long-term contracts with those companies, specifically because, they're companies that are proven, they have proven track records, and I think they found that it's very easy to get into that long-term contracting cycle. I know Cameco, they've talked a lot about it. They've signed up a lot of long-term contracts. They've certainly kept themselves, somewhat exposed to to the market prices and everything, all these good things. But the utilities, if the production and the company is there and ready to contract, I think the answer is there's utilities that are very interested to enter into those contracts. Like I said, there's 500 million pounds that are uncovered only through the next 7 years. I think utilities are still, some of them are still sitting on the sidelines, waiting, a little bit longer, seeing, what comes to fruition, what other projects are going to come online. Like anytime you hear about a company bringing a new project online, it's great news, but utilities like that because it gives them comfort. But I think when you talk to folks like the UXs of the world, the trade techs, these folks that are the closest to the price and to supply and demand, they'll tell you that, it doesn't matter right now. Like Cameco needs to bring on all of its production that it's got kind of, that's been on the sidelines, and all these companies, NexGen, Denison, all that production is needed. It's going to be needed to fill that gap. And so that's not going to necessarily save everybody and keep the price really low. There's going to be more production needed. The IsoEnergies are needed. Other new deposits need to be found that are economic and brought online. And so, it's just really exciting because there's a lot of activity behind the scenes, but certainly much, much more to come, Gwen, because there's a lot of pounds that need to be contracted for.
Yeah. Okay, cool. You referenced sort of without detail a few times in your presentation that there's work going on the other side of the property line at Hurricane. What has been said publicly? What can you expand on that at all? Obviously, we're all anybody who follows the story really wants to know how much work there is and what we might learn at some point in the near future about the extension of Hurricane to the west.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of public, certainly not from Cameco or Rano. I mean, all we go on is, look, there's drills on the other side. That's not a secret. We cooperate on building some ice roads and things like that. So we know they've built a camp. They're doing the work to kind of figure out themselves what's on the other side. And for us, that's just really exciting. frankly, it's exciting no matter what happens. If it's very, very small amount of uranium on the other side, which doesn't seem likely, but if it is, that just means we're sort of going down this track on our own, and that's okay. We're fine. If they find a lot of uranium, then that's an exciting story for the industry, and obviously it'll make sense to have some conversations on how do you cooperate. But yeah, I think they've got a very active program going on this winter. I don't think you'll hear, any results, from Cameco or Rano anytime soon. But just from observing and seeing what's going on the other side, there's drills turning, and they've clearly made a commitment to figure out what is on the other side, which is great news.
That is great news for sure.
Yeah.
Quick answer, well, if it can be quick. Which of the exploration projects in the portfolio are you most excited to do work on, and why?
Yeah, well, we continue to have a lot of interest in Larocque, this Kernahan trend I mentioned up at the top northeast. We're excited to see what comes out of that over the next next season or two. I'd say Hawk, the one other project I mentioned, like that was our first drill program this winter. Like I said, we saw structures and alterations that were very supportive of what we hoped we'd see. So it's definitely, there's definitely work to be done ahead, but we like that project a lot. It's a little deeper than some of the other stuff. So it's sort of in that territory that hasn't been explored too much, but it's not too deep. It's not like 1,000 meters. It's more, there's certainly projects in the 600-700 meters, the MacArthur's and others that are down at that depth, but this area hasn't been explored very much. And so that's one we also like quite a bit.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Tim. Super. It was great to catch up. And there were some tidbits there that were pretty interesting to me. Some of the stuff about contracting, the demand for contracting, some of the stuff about the work that's going on the other side of the border by Cameco and Urano. There's some interesting stuff there for sure. IsoEnergy, certainly a contender for significant investor interest when this uranium bull market goes. I am happy to make that statement. Tim, thank you for your time today and for being part of the event.
Gwen, thanks so much. Great to see you.